This is the web platform web blah, 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 blah. This is the Web Platform Podcast, episode number 110, the AMP Mobile Revolution. Today on our panel, I have Justin Ribeiro.
Hello, wonderful people. Wonderful start there, Eric. Real smooth.
We have Amal Hussain.
Hi, everyone.
And myself, Eric Isaacson. And our guest today, Googler, jQuery hero, just web hero in general, Paul Bacchus. And he's going to be talking with us today about AMP, which is, what is it, advanced mobile pages or?
Accelerated.
Accelerated mobile pages. Wow, I'm such a horrible Google promoter.
No worries.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, what you've been up to.
Sure. Yeah, my name is Paul, as you just heard, and I've been working on. So lately, I've been working on AMP, but before that, I've been working on promoting and helping the product direction of Chrome DevTools. Hopefully, making your tooling better than before, with stuff like the device mode and a few other things. And then before that, I worked on HTML5 gaming for a long time, and before that I worked on the jQuery project and jQuery UI, and tried to make the web more interactive and friendly to everyone building for it. Right now I'm spending most of my time making the web fast and user-friendly again, especially the mobile web, and with the help of AMP.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic because of the rise of progressive web apps, and also we're still deciding on, hey, do you want a mobile app or do you want mobile web, or is mobile web a thing? So it's interesting to me to see how we've evolved a lot with this. And accelerated mobile pages, as you said, is sort of a community-driven project. It's open source. It's not just Google. Can you explain kind of what it is and why it was created and how, maybe?
Sure. So AMP was created because of two reasons, mainly. Well, it was part of the DNI initiative in Europe, the Digital News Initiative, which, to explain it in layman's terms, it's where a bunch of really frustrated publishers and ad vendors and all sorts of other technology companies came together, including platforms like Google and Pinterest and whatever. And so all came together to figure out what can we do to make the landscape friendly again for publishers. And then the other reason was that we saw, and in particular the people working on tech right now on AMP, saw that the web was dying, frankly. We all used the mobile web back then. That was actually a year ago. We just celebrated our AMPiversary, our first anniversary for AMP. Yes. So 1 year ago, we just, sorry, that was the mic. We just did not like using the mobile web, and I think we're not the only one, right? You click on a page, you get pestered with analytics, ads, slow loading pages. It was a disaster, really. And looking at the stats that we've seen coming up, bounce rates on the web, it was clear. And we just released a new study, actually, where previously I always had on my slides that after 3 seconds, 40% of people bounce and leave the page, but it's now 52%. So basically, if your page doesn't load in less than 3 seconds, you're losing half of your audience, and there's nothing you can do against that. And so this is a huge problem because the average load time right now on mobile web is about 18 seconds. So there's quite a discrepancy here. And so this is the reason why AMP was born, to actually, on one side, help publishers to really gain leverage again on the mobile web outside of closed ecosystems. And then on the other side, really, and this is where I'm very invested in, is make the mobile web friendly for users, make it actually fun and easy to use, and rescue it, frankly.
And do you feel that publishing was kind of a natural fit because it's really content heavy, and it's something that can also be trimmed pretty easily because again there's text. If we
yeah, so we started with content publishers because we realized that there's not a lot of very heavy interactivity that's required on those pages usually. There's a lot of JavaScript on those pages right now, but most of the JavaScript is analytics libraries, crazy ads, some of the stuff that the user will never see, but really slows down the page, and none of it is really interactive for the user. So you got images, you got text, not a lot of websites go through the additional overhead of creating highly art directed articles, like The Verge did sometimes, where you have stuff flying around and interactive demos and stuff like that. So that kind of stuff is relatively rare in the publishing space. It exists, but it's relatively rare. So we figured that it might be a good starting point to start with general content publishing, because that would be the easiest to convert to a more restricted subset.
And with the, on that note, it was created for news, right? And then, you can do full-blown articles, and you call it AMP Pages, which kind of says to me that it is very content-focused rather than having like an AMP app per se.
Right.
So now for things like this, I was surprised that Google is giving some SEO benefits for, right? So can we talk about that and how it relates to those particular like news and articles versus something like a listing page, where you're having a list of things that, like for instance at Carfax we have a used car listing, right? Mm-hmm. So that would behave differently, I would think, with SEO, with the linking based, rather than the content for news and articles.
You mean the single page apps versus link pages?
No, I mean as far as like SEO benefits, like if you're doing an article or news type of thing, there seems to be some advantage that the Google algorithm for search would give to this.
I'm not sure about that actually. I don't. So we don't, as far as I know, we don't. There's no changes to ranking per se.
Okay.
When it comes to AMP.
So it's purely based on performance then, I'm guessing.
It's purely based on performance. So there's no, AMP is not part of the ranking algorithm.
That's
so,
good to hear, actually.
Yeah. So this is a common misconception, actually. Now, we don't talk about it a lot within the AMP project because the AMP project, again, is standalone from Google Search. And so I don't work on Google Search. So it's usually not really my topic to cover. But right now, it's not used as a ranking signal. And however, of course, if you look at the general pattern of, on one side, you're producing something with a JavaScript framework that probably has much worse semantics. And on the other hand, you're producing a page with AMP that forces you to use some semantics, right? Just implicitly, you get a SEO benefit out of that. That's my guess, at least, because the way AMP is used forces you to use semantics, forces you to use, let's say you have an AMP carousel. The AMP carousel is actually not a component that you initialize in JavaScript, right? And then you use all your data, prepare all your data in JSON or whatever, but it's actually embedded into the HTML. It's a HTML tag that has subtags that can be easily parsed by any search engine. So I think that's one of the main advantages that AMP offers.
So it's an unintended SEO boost, right? To some degree.
Yeah, that would be my guess. Yes, but there's no such rule as, hey, this is AMP, so let's rank it higher. So that doesn't exist.
That's good to hear, because I had gotten that impression based on some people I had spoken with about AMP. So that is good, and it wasn't anyone part of the project, just people who were not developers.
Yeah, so that's a confirmation.
Good. I noticed too, I went to the CDN where you have the version that you use in the examples, And that's 52K gzipped. So not too bad considering what some of the libraries out there are. The web components pieces you use, which I was very happy about. Yay, you have custom elements. And I'm not sure if you're using any other pieces, but you definitely have ES 2015 in there. Looks like you're using Babel, some service worker stuff, and a lot of polyfills.
Yeah.
So to get the 52K is, I think, pretty fair for all that stuff.
And that's not the whole story, actually. So I wish it would be. I wish it would be that, but if you use all of the AMP components, it certainly grows bigger. So you include extra components if you need them, and so you can end up with a couple 100 kilobyte if you use all of them. But most people don't use all of them.
Mm-hmm. And large code bases too. If you work in a larger company, if you're in a startup, it's not such a big deal like to do something like to add more stuff. But sometimes if you're dealing with legacy code bases, large code bases, they can get pretty fragile. Like a Jenga puzzle, you pull out a piece, and if you add some new technology, things can be pretty bad. Like where the developers don't really know it, now they have to support it. There's a lot of factors in that. How do you see AMP fitting into that sort of ecosystem?
Well, you have to differentiate between the people using AMP to build pages, right, and then the developers working on AMP itself. So for the people who use AMP in projects, there's no overhead at all because they just write HTML tags basically with some custom logic in the tags themselves. But there's no overhead in terms of new technologies to learn. I mean, the custom tag mentality existed already, 10 years ago with Dojo. So this is not new. But then when you're actually developing a new tag or working in the AMP ecosystem, then there's a few things we do to make it really strict. For instance, our ESLint rules and our rule sets to work with the actual AMP code. And I touched them recently, are actually very strict. For instance, you cannot use var if the var statement, if there's actually if there's no use for it, if you should rather use a const. So there's a lot of benefits there. So yeah, I would say there's no additional overhead on the actual developer side.
Well, it is intriguing, right? Because some of the design principles that AMP is built around, the one that I particularly love the most on the list is don't break the web. So much of the things that you sort of hear about AMP, well, it's proprietary and it's it's trying to create a separate sort of web that exists, but in reality, it's really is just the web with a very specific pattern of development.
That's true. Yeah, that's exactly what Malte, the engineering lead, would say as well. Where we always have that battle internally and externally. Should we call it library? Should we call it framework? What is it exactly? And it is a web components library. It's a web components library that adds web components, creates a superset of HTML almost. But it is an open technology. That's the important bit, right? It doesn't create another closed ecosystem. And the tricky thing that where you basically talk about framework versus library, what's the distinction is that while AMP feels like a library in action, and you can still use any kind of flexbox or whatever, go really crazy with your page layout, there are some restrictions that we're putting on top of you that feel more frameworky, I would say. However, the real thing you need to notice here is that in a framework, you usually embed yourselves in, right? You get a specific way of doing things. You're embedded into the framework as where in a library scenario, the library assists you in doing more stuff and getting more stuff done. So this is how I think about it. And so AMP definitely feels more like a library to me, giving you the maximum freedom allowed to build really fast pages.
I love that you're not using Polymer too. Like, I love Polymer, but I think that it's from my own personal, and I think Leon would agree with me too. He's a panelist on the show a lot, and we do a lot of like native to the metal components. And it is true, we have to write a whole bunch of plumbing, as Rob had said, Rob Dodson, for each component. We probably should create components for that. But it's I think it's great because a lot of people, when they look at something like Polymer, they're like, oh my God, now I have to use Polymer. I'm using React though. So if you have something like this, it's just HTML. Like you said, it's custom elements.
Yeah.
And you're enforcing stuff through certain performance rules. You're having CSS animations, you can't do certain things. You're enforcing Rail on that page, if I'm correct.
That's
okay. And Rail,
yeah, implicit, yes.
So Rail, for those who didn't listen to the episode we had with Paul Lewis a few episodes ago, Rail is it's just a pattern for performance that's used. So check out that episode if you haven't. I think it was 102 or 103, something like that. But yeah, it's like it's very powerful, and you can use it with any technology. It's pretty much just principle.
Yeah. So how I say it usually is basically we try to force you to stay on the fast lane on a highway, and I compare it to the German Autobahn, where a lot of tourists don't know that we're very explicit about, the left lane is the fastest and the right lane is the slowest. And so a lot of tourists don't know that and just use any lane, but then don't realize that they're stuck in traffic because they don't know that rule. And so with AMP, we force you to stay on the very left line and remove all the obstacles in front of you. So that's
there's some great pics in that in the presentation that was on the site that was in San Francisco HTML.
Yeah.
Where there's like cars on the Autobahn or something like that, and the next one is like cars on a truck all together lined up.
Yeah. On Polymer, on that note, I mean, Polymer just has a completely different use case than AMP. So Polymer allows you to build big apps that feel like native apps, right? With easy to share custom components. And it would have been the wrong use of Polymer if we had embedded into AMP, because it's a completely different use case, and it, like any framework, it does some of the things generically and abstract things that you might benefit a lot in an environment where you're building an app, right? So lots of sugar on top, but if you're building another library on top of that library, you're ending up with a lot of cruft that the end user doesn't benefit from. So it might make sense to do more development cycles and build custom on web components and Shadow DOM and stuff like that in order to ensure maximum speed.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to say it.
Yeah. So I mean, I agree, by the way, great points. And thanks for clarifying that as well. I definitely feel like AMP is more of a library. So can you maybe clarify a little bit more the differences between AMP and Rail in terms of like the patterns? There's some shared patterns. So what do they share? Where do they differ? And ultimately, for developers that are, not in the publishing industry, right? So how do we kind of take advantage of AMP patterns?
Let's see. So AMP we don't really talk about the pattern so much as opposed to, okay, so what we talk in AMP, so Rail is a developer terminology, right? So you focus on, what are the four things? Animation is the A, idle is the I, and then L is load, I think. And what is the first one?
Yeah, response time is the
response. Here we go. Yes. So all of those are important and are covered in AMP as well. But when we talk about speed in AMP, it really boils down to load time and progressive and lazy loading within the app. So we want to make sure that the content is king and is the first thing you see anytime. And then the other part is that we have this rule of never ever obstructing the user action. So if the user wants to scroll, we better let him scroll. And there can be nothing that comes in the way of the user scrolling and interacting with the content. No ad, no additional component, nothing. So that's a very strict rule in AMP. And the same thing goes for content jumping around. Another big no-no. So we have speed and user experience goals in AMP, and we don't really make them as granular as the Rail methodology does. We use all of those things, of course. We do, but we don't really talk about them in the same way. I don't know if that answers the question.
Oh, no, that definitely answers the question. I think, that definitely clarifies it. So I guess in terms of, for developers that are, building something that's not necessarily a site with blog content or news content, they would have to be willing to compromise some principle, like some of the user experience, right? And
just the
content
implementation of, not the actual user experience.
Well, yeah, I would actually say you get a better user experience out of it, to be honest. Most of the time.
Well, yeah, but I meant like if there's some funky animations and whatnot, right? It's a bit more bare bones.
There are some things, yeah. So with animations, for instance, we currently only support GPU accelerated animations. That's transform and opacity right now. Might be a chance to, if browsers do a better job of allowing us to animate more of those properties in a GPU accelerated way, then maybe in the future we'll relax those rules. But right now we force you to do that. So if you want to animate a background, then yes, you're probably out of luck right now with AMP. But you'd be surprised how much you can do with just opacity and transform if you do it the right way. However, other than that, we don't really have a lot of styling restrictions in place. I mean, for instance, if you look at my own homepage, paulbackhaus.com, that's an AMP page. It's written completely in AMP. The listing pages right now still have some validation issues, but all the leaf pages, which means all the articles themselves, they have the same menu, they have the same layout, they're responsive, they work on desktop and mobile, and it's all AMP. There's really nothing I needed that AMP didn't have. So I'm seeing a lot of the current articles that you see for AMP sort of look like the M-dot world, where if you look at them on desktop, it's really a very narrow view, not responsive, images after image, and really not a lot of magic going on. But it doesn't have to be that way. I'm actively battling that idea that you can't do the same thing you can do on most web pages, because really you can. I mean, nothing holds you up.
So if I have an existing app and I have blocking scripts, let's say for analytics purposes, or some things that are not necessarily in line with the way, the philosophy or for the design of AMP, am I going to have a hard time? Like, do I have to migrate that entire page over to follow those rules before I can implement any of the AMP HTML?
Sort of. So it depends, right? What you can do, what's a very good alternative, is to embed the functionality that really requires blocking tags, etc., into iframes. So a lot of publishers have done that with AMP, where the more interactive widgets I had on the page are just becoming AMP iframes.
I think my eyeballs just popped out there when you said multiple iframes on a page. Is that like performant now?
Well, okay, I'm not saying it's the best idea, right? Ideally, in an ideal world, you would convert everything at once, but for some of the bigger properties, it's significant work involved to convert all interactive widgets to CSS only or something.
So you're saying it's a temporary fix then to migrate those things? I
would say it's a temporary fix. However, it's also not that painful as on normal pages, because AMP has this lazy loading mechanism that means that iframes always get deprioritized in the load pipeline. So meaning an iframe that happens to be on the second viewport will not load before the main content that has arrived. And that means even when AMPs are preloaded on platforms like Google Search, that's one of the main characteristics of AMP, actually, that you can preload them safely. What's happening is just the first viewport gets preloaded without external tags. So we preload the first viewport and we prioritize the most important bits. So the overhead is actually quite small compared to preloading a whole page. So
Okay.
while iframes are still not the greatest thing in the world, I think they work much better in a constrained environment like AMP.
Well, I remember Seamless was supposed to help with this, and then I never heard anything after like another year.
Yeah,
So, but
Seamless, I think honestly, I think it was a good idea, but I don't know, it never really got anywhere.
So
cool. So go ahead. Sorry, Justin.
Well, I think the thing to keep in mind here is that a lot of this is very well defined. So when you talk about how to deal with things within the iframe sort of world that AMP can give you, there are specific guidelines to the way that must be, from the way pre-connects work to the way that you handle the sandbox that you are in, particularly in the ad space. So
yeah,
the notion that I have to have a one-for-one sort of page thing is not really a lot of what the first implementations looked like. If you look at a lot of things that the Washington Post did initially, new components got built out of that, particularly the menu system for slide menus, which wasn't part of the original sort of AMP set that occurred when things got developed out. So as people started to move content into AMP using not just I am only an AMP, but I have a canonical that points to this, the ecosystem sort of grew to start to find those cases where we needed a little bit more. And all that is very well defined within both the specs and the READMEs. If you haven't looked at the AMP project repo on GitHub, you should. There's lots and lots of good information in there in terms of the way you're supposed to handle certain sort of things like moving my widget from this page to an AMP-based page, and whether you should do that or not. Because now AMP has things like carousels and all kinds of things that you can use that are already performant. And it's simply a matter of figuring out what your integration pipeline is. And for a lot of people so far that I've sort of seen do this and talked to and helped move into AMP, a lot of people find it actually relatively easy to do because it is the ecosystem's not so large that you have to sit there and deal with a lot of problems. You can sit there and say, I already have separation of my data and my style, and then I can move stuff in and out. And people have found that relatively easy, at least in the use cases I've seen so far.
Yeah, that's a very good answer.
There is a really good tutorial you have on the site that walks you through everything, which I have in the show notes. There's also use cases. I mean, you guys have documented and put in so much on there that I think is really useful.
We just got a large update shipped actually last week that I worked on to the styling and layout section is completely redone and focus a lot more on art direction and stuff like that. So if you haven't looked at the new updates, it's worth taking a look. So yeah, we're trying to do our best when it comes to documentation. There's still a lot to do, but yeah, we're trying. and yeah, I think Justin's answer was great. The ecosystem is growing all the time, and we add new tags all the time. Just recently, we helped get Gfycat on board as a new tag. And it was a very straightforward approach. They contacted us. They said, well, it would be nice to have Gfycat on the platform. We're like, well, does it benefit a lot of people? Well, yes, it does benefit a lot of people because quite a few people want to embed Gfycats. And that was it. They built a very nice implementation, created a pull request. We accepted the pull request, and now it's in AMP. So there's not a lot of complicated process to follow to get a new component into AMP if it's clear that it benefits the ecosystem, not just one publisher. And we see that all the time. So the ecosystem is growing all the time.
So you have the pages, and then you have the components that you're using, the custom elements.
Yes.
And you said we can definitely make our own if we needed to locally, right?
No, you cannot.
Using that? You cannot. Okay.
No, that doesn't work. So you cannot create your own custom components.
Okay. And as far as like some of these, when you design these components, are you thinking something that was brought up recently to me with web components for custom elements, especially using Shadow DOM, which doesn't seem like you are, but custom elements in general, is that if custom elements don't work for whatever reason, there's no progressive enhancement by default. So what some of the suggestions are is to just put content inside of there, like hard-coded, you know, and that would be slots in Shadow DOM or something like that. This way, if they don't actually work, they'll render something. So is that something that you guys are looking at with design, or?
Well, first of all, we have polyfills for almost all of that stuff. So we support all the latest browsers and the last 2 versions of all of them. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. But then, yes, we do have slot functionality in a lot of components, and we have a placeholder and fallback mechanism for almost all components, where you insert a placeholder and a fallback, let's say into an AMP image tag or AMP video tag. And so the placeholder will be shown before the component is ready. The fallback will be shown if the component cannot be initialized for any reason. So yes, I think almost all components have that functionality built in. And we, as a mentality, we always make sure that components can be nested and mixed. So for instance, an AMP carousel can have semantically, you have an AMP carousel at the top, and then you add AMP images within the AMP carousel, and you can add even more stuff and nest it down below, and it all works. So it's not just one component with thousands of custom properties and attributes. We try to be as semantic as possible.
Yeah, I think that's great. Looking through the code, it's kind of exciting. You have all this fun stuff, but it's still very practical at the same time.
That was our hope.
You also have a couple of other tools that are related to this, which is like AMP Cache, right? And AMP Validator, which I want to get to later because that's a whole big discussion.
Yeah.
But how does the cache work, and why might you use this?
Yeah. So the cache. So important to note that there's the AMP cache specification that defines how a cache should work, and that's being done by the AMP team itself. And then there's implementations on top of that, and right now the only implementation is the Google AMP cache. Now that's not to say that that has to be the only implementation. We're opening up that spec so other caches can follow, but the Google AMP cache is actually separate. So it's a Google cache as opposed to the AMP project itself. Just wanted to make that clear. And so the Google AMP cache sits between platforms that show users AMP content and the actual publisher's origin. So it caches, it works like a reverse proxy. It caches all publishers' pages the first time they hit from a platform. And then the cache is showing the current result to the user, as opposed to the result coming directly from the origin, therefore offloading the request. Now, what this means is that there's a couple of optimizations done on the cache. So one is we do all sorts of optimizations. We switch to HTTP2 and SSL traffic, so we automatically secure your pages and traffic. We optimize all images in the future. It's something we're working on right now. And there's a lot of other optimizations you could do that we're looking into while keeping the actual content intact. So that's really important. One of our first priorities is actually do not mess with the content, right? The content should still look the same, feel the same. But then the other real big benefit, and this is important, is that nothing that doesn't validate arrives in the cache and would appear, let's say in the top stories carousel on Google. That means that the platform that integrates with the cache, and we actually have an API to see is that AMP page in the cache, that's automatically an indication that the page is actually validated, which means that nothing crazy would happen on the page. There would be no custom JavaScript that's blocking or anything, which means that it's almost, it's a very good sign that the page that we let our users click onto is actually user-friendly and fast. And this is one of the most important delivery mechanisms of AMP, one of the most important things of AMP, that it's a container format that's easy to share and easy to validate. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, that really does. I was actually really curious about AMP Cache as well, because I'm glad that somebody asked that question. So what tools are out there for development for teams that developers interact with daily, like marketing and creative groups? And so, how does AMP kind of help them, for the non-techies?
Well, we have ampbyexample.com that gives you a brief overview of what AMP can do, which is a nice resource. So just look at all the examples. There's examples for individual components like AMP Carousel, but there's also a huge set of compound examples that, like a housing listing page or something, or e-commerce site, to give you an idea of what AMP can do. So that's quite nice. Now, what's also, let's say, so you said for non-developers. Okay, for non-developers, we're now in the process of creating a lot more documentation. So please stay tuned. We're working right now. The current site that we have, ampproject.org, is quite development-centric, developer-centric, but we're working on a lot more resources to help marketers and CEOs and CTOs and whatever to figure out why AMP is useful and what it's good for. Now, on the actual tooling side of things, we have a few things that help with validation. Validation is sort of the most important point when it comes to publishing AMP pages. So we want to make it as easy as possible. The most default way is to use the development equals one hash bang URL that allows you to see the validated, so that the validator right in the Chrome DevTools console. That's the most straightforward way, built-in way. But then we have a plugin for Chrome that shows you whether a page is valid right in Chrome itself, which is quite nice. So you just see a little nice blue flag if it's valid, and otherwise it's red, and you click on it and see what's not good. Now we also have a web interface to validate easily under validator.ampproject.org. And we have a command line API as well, where if you want to check a lot of pages at the same time, you can use the command line validator. In addition to that, there's quite a few companies, external companies like Drupal and WordPress, that have created tools to assist with either just enabling AMP for your current CMSs or converting from HTML to AMP. So for instance, Drupal has created a PHP library that converts classic HTML to AMP, which is quite nice if you don't want to go through all of it yourself. And then WordPress has created an AMP plugin that they've enabled for all hosted pages, and you can easily integrate it into your own self-hosted pages as well, to just one-click enable AMP with a theme that you can then customize. It makes it super, super easy for people who are not very familiar with the tech to just enable AMP. So that's quite nice too.
Awesome.
That is pretty cool that you have the Chrome extension and everything. I'm trying to figure out now here at work too, as far as using the Search Console, the mobile-friendly console for SEO purposes, getting Lighthouse to check for progressive web application stuff.
Right.
Like, where do I have like a catch-all tool that I can use, or is it you have to have all 4 or 3 plugins to use?
That's a good plug actually for AMP Bench. So yes, AMP Bench is a service that we just released. We actually had that one for a while internally. It's I think it's under appbench.appspot.com right now. And it was an internal tool for a long time that our partners team has built to help partners figure out any issues they have with AMP pages. It's kind of a superset of all of the smaller things. It includes the validator, it embeds the validator, but it also covers a lot more ground, like how does Google see that page, and does it have the canonical meta link correctly and stuff like that. So it's quite a nice resource to look at and validate your AMP pages, especially if you want to target any kind of third-party platforms like Google. So that's important. But yeah, Search Console as well is a good tool if you want to make sure that your pages appear on Google specifically, not directly related to AMP, the open source project, but related to, I want my AMPs to appear on Google. So that's where it becomes important.
Getting amped.
Yes, exactly.
So how many times a day do you have to say that? Like, not Google search. This is not Google search.
Well, yeah. So I mean, I understand why that can be confusing. You know, we had a lot of initial press that, you know, said things like, "Hey, Google's new competitor," and sorry, Google's new competing service, AMP is here and whatever, right? So Google's AMP is definitely a term that I'm trying to fight because it's not true. It's just frankly not true. One issue right now is that most core contributors to the project work for Google. We're trying to change that. We're inviting people to help out with the project. This is not by design at all. We definitely want to have more core contributors from other companies join and freelancers and whatever. But so far, no one has identified themselves. So we'd be glad for any support. But we do accept, you know, very many pull requests every week.
I think that's true though for all Google projects that are open sourced, right? I mean, Polymer, I'm sure, struggles with that. Angular, you know, because it's out there, and then you're devoting resources. You know, like, to be fair, there's an entire team on Angular that just works on it full time. And
yeah, that's true.
Polymer, same thing. So I can see why people might think that.
But it can be done. Like, for instance, with jQuery, for those of you who have been around back then, but I think you probably have. So with jQuery, I actually worked in a sponsored position. I was hired by Liferay, who created portals in Java and used jQuery in the front end. So I worked in a sponsored position for almost 2 years, working on jQuery full time, and still people didn't associate it with Liferay. So I think it can be made to work. One of the reasons it worked well back then is because we started without Liferay, and only, I think, 3 or 4 months after I released the first version of jQuery, Liferay approached me and actually hired me to go full time. So that definitely changed the impression. But I think it can be made to work. I think if we had more people from other companies working in sponsored positions, you know, we could change the perception of AMP quite dramatically. But even now, I want to make sure that it's an open source project and not directly tied to Google.
What's really exciting, though, I think from a development standpoint, not from usability even, but you're using these technologies that are newer, and so you'll get younger developers, more excited developers to contribute, I would think. Here at Carfax, it's interesting. The first I heard about AMP was from our new SEO director.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I was like, wait a minute, this is custom elements. Why do I not know this?
Yeah, so this is actually interesting. I thought about this yesterday, and it's kind of weird that on the user side, so I mean the developer using AMP, right? It's actually almost boring to the point where it's so streamlined and simplified that you just use HTML, right, to do all the things. And it's actually, if you're a hardcore JavaScript engineer, it might actually be quite boring, frankly, to build AMP components, to implement AMP components in your site, because it's too easy.
But I don't think to actually work on the AMP project, though.
Yeah. On the other hand, yeah. So this is the other side, right? To actually work on the AMP project is completely different because, yeah, as you were saying correctly, there's a lot of new tech being used. It's all ES 2016. You get web components, all sorts of new tech that's actually quite exciting. And I wish we had a better overlap here, right? I wish that the developers building AMP pages would also be the ones contributing to the actual source code, but they tend to be different developers. The ones are the people that would go to, you know, conferences like JSConf, you know, because they're crazy about JavaScript and try to be on top of things and ride the wave. And then the others are, you know, publishers and CEO experts and all the people who actually build pages, agencies build pages every day and just want to create beautiful content. And the two audiences don't overlap very well. I wish that was the case, but I don't think it's actually happening right now.
So I guess I would say that I feel like there is some room for overlap in the sense that, as somebody who is, in heavy JavaScript day in, day out, like you still need to architect your application to be able to handle, these two different types of scenarios gracefully, right? What's the mobile experience, what's the web experience? And I think like that creating that progressive experience and, and the mechanism to handle that is definitely, I think like that's fun and interesting. And I think that there's work there.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think, and you'll hear much more about this going forward, actually, especially on the Chrome Dev Summit that's happening in November that we'll live stream. So we are very, very focused on combining AMP and PWA to create the best possible user journey for users. So I'm gonna release a blog post about this very soon, and you'll see a lot more activity in the next days and weeks leading up to the Chrome Dev Summit. But the basic idea is that we want you to start fast and then stay fast. Basically, arriving on a Leaf page, the first point that people come to would always be an AMP page because it's the fastest to get someone onto the content. And then we use the AMP install service worker tag to automatically bootstrap the app shell through service worker. Service worker loads on the origin, caches the app shell for a progressive web app, something that the Washington Post actually does right now. Yeah, it's super fast while the user is actually engaging with the content, reading content. And then at the bottom, you offer them something like, hey, want to read more, right? Or want to engage more and have our app. So you click on that. The thing loads instantly. It goes into the progressive web app. The URL space that was reserved for AMP is then taken over because the service worker takes over, loads the app shell directly from the origin. And you can do some really exciting things even on the progressive web app side then, because as you realize, you have all the Leaf pages, all the content pages already published in AMP. So what you can do now is actually build an app shell around AMP. You can use Shadow DOM to embed AMP, because again, AMP is one of the primary use cases of AMP is that it's a container format. So you can embed those AMP pages very easily, including slot functionality where, let's say, you replace the header, remove the header, insert some very interactive functionality. Because right now you're in a controlled space. Your service worker took over. You're in a progressive web app. You embed your AMPs. You don't need to create another content infrastructure because you already have the AMPs published. They're perfectly layouted. And you just build all the interactivity you want for progressive web apps around it, like push notifications, sign in, whatever, web payments. So that is a story that you'll hear quite a lot in the future coming from us. And this was just a teaser.
Yeah, wow.
I would imagine, though, for that, it is pretty exciting. I would imagine that if you have content that needs to be read by a search engine or something like that, within that, though, you wouldn't want to use you'd want to use slots, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you wouldn't want to have it embedded inside the Shadow DOM. You'd want to have it in the Light DOM.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So yeah, I'm pretty sure that you guys are doing that anyway. But
yeah, I mean, to be fair, this is just the first pattern we're thinking about. We have a few ways of doing this, but we just need to open it up to the community and let you all play with it and see what works and what doesn't, right? Because it's not something we can figure out behind closed doors to see which of the patterns stick and which work in real life. We just need to come out with them and see what the community does with it.
Well, we're planning on using it at Carfax, definitely, because we're
Awesome.
getting, we don't even have to fight. Like it's been told to us, hey, we're using this at some point. Oh, okay.
That's great to hear.
So hopefully we'll find some cases where we can contribute back. I hope at least.
Yeah, I mean, but about ultimately, like this is really, to me, this is like the coming together of these two very cool ideas to, I think, eventually, bring us into really what will be the next evolution, right? Which is like fast on web, fast on mobile, and being able to, as a developer, not have to cater to like 4 different types of implementations, right? And so being able to kind of, like you said, create that app shell where, it goes really nicely regardless of where my user is coming in from. So that's awesome. I'm really excited to hear about that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I don't understand about it is someone has explained this to me, and I still don't fully understand it. But AMP has been said to supersede deep linking in some cases.
Right.
So like whether it's in a mobile app versus a progressive web app, what is this all about?
So I can't give you any details on if that will stick or not. I think right now it is that way. So right now, I think if you're seeing an AMP page for your app coming from Google search, then yes, it will override deep linking. Now, I don't know if it will be like that in the future. I can't say anything about that because I just don't know. But the thinking here is the theoretical idea that you need to think about is how does the user arrive at the content they wanted fastest, right? Is it by deep linking, by actually opening the app on the mobile phone, or is it by clicking on the AMP page? And through some of the tests, I'm actually fairly convinced that bootstrapping, loading an app like let's say Yelp, right? Loading the app from a cold state on your mobile phone, then initializing the app, and then going to the actual result page within the app, within the native app, deep linking with it. I'm actually fairly convinced, and I hope we can collect some data on this soon. I'm fairly convinced that will be slower than just loading the AMP page. Now, what publishers want is a completely different topic, right? They might want the deep linking functionality for some very good reason. So again, I don't know what Google search thinking is here, but yeah, I'm
the SEO juice.
Yeah, that's just my idea behind it. I think what we should do what's best for the user.
I also suspect that your theory is correct, that it will be slower because, ultimately you're also subject to the phone's, the phone's actual CPU and like processing speed. So,
right.
Generally, people with the name Paul are pretty smart anyway, so it should be right.
So I think someone here is outside waiting for my room to free up. We can move. We can continue running if you give me a second.
Sure.
Just give me a brief second.
Cue the elevator music.
Yes. All right. Elevator music. I was trying to switch.
We're gonna lose our one viewer.
Just a second.
That's an awesome microphone right there.
Yes, it is a very good microphone. Yes, this looks not good. Okay, 1 second.
Yep.
Are we having fun with AMP yet? I think we're having fun with AMP.
I'm getting amped. Getting amped.
I don't know. I've implemented it in a few spots. It fits rather well. So I'm pretty generally pleased with it. And the ecosystem is growing. And
yeah, and you could use it with Polymer or React or whatever. That doesn't matter. I'm just
you don't need the framework. And I've written the crazy thing is that you can do some really trick stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I think that to me, that's the most appealing thing is you don't need a framework, right? Like that's the best part. I mean, I feel like how much time has everybody wasted learning how to do that one thing in Angular or that one thing in React? It's just a waste of time sometimes. So, and yeah, so we're just gossiping about how awesome AMP is.
Yeah, probably curse and a blessing to some. It depends on your viewpoint. So yes, good news. I found another room and we're good to run again.
Okay, we have only a few more questions, so it shouldn't take too long. So as far as how is AMP used for advertisements? Because it seems like publishers would be pretty interested in their advertisers, right? What trade-offs do you have when dealing with that versus using like standard type of ads?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. So first of all, we support quite a lot of ad vendors and implementations, and there's more coming all the time. So we are listening actively to the publishers to see what kind of ads they want. However, we also are very strict about certain things that we think are just detrimental to the user experience. So first of all, AMP will always ensure that the content is prioritized above ads. So you cannot load an ad before the content loads in AMP. That's just something we will prevent. And if we see someone finding a way, then we'll fix it. So this is one of the primary goals, that ads are secondary. And then we also don't allow ads that are really obnoxious, that really are not.
Well, those don't happen. What are you talking about?
Well, I give you two examples, right? One is pop-ups, modals that are popping up anyway, and the other ones are interstitials. Two ad formats that, I don't know. Does anyone here on this call like interstitials? Probably not.
No.
Oh, I love them. I love to have my day just completely ruined by the inability to click the X that's off screen because someone doesn't understand how loud.
Yeah, right. I mean, I clicked. I want to read about this article, but no, I'm not interested in reading about this other thing first, right? So, no.
Yeah, it's like television. I like to watch the commercials and I fast forward through the show.
Yeah. Well, yeah. This is a hard battle sometimes, because some of those really obnoxious ad types make more money because they're more obnoxious. And so as a publisher, you have to constantly make the decision of, hey, do I want to get some short-term gain out of that one ad type, or do I want to not annoy my users? And AMP has been born to help you make that decision, to actually help you create beautiful user experiences that monetize well. Again, that's a super important goal of AMP as well, is that we don't want to harm the ecosystem, right? We want to help it, and we just need to balance all the time to see what works and what doesn't. But we're listening to both users and publishers.
Yeah, like I said too, you have a lot of use cases on the website. And I thought that was great. You have actually statistics on these use cases of how much revenue was saved, and in some cases at least. And there was performance benchmarks, and that to me is like really impressive, because it's rare enough on a project, especially an open source project, that you see like a demo that's maybe inline so you could just kind of play with it. But you actually have like lots of large companies doing this, and there's some really good use cases there. Like Slate was a good one I liked. And there was different use cases too.
Yeah, I thought the I/O presentations as well were really awesome, because the companies were there as well with their developer teams. So
yeah, I mean, that's one of the benefits of being relatively close to Google as a project, having a lot of people at Google work on AMP, that we get access to some of the partner teams that work with those partners all the time, allowing us to create those really nice case studies. And we just released 5 of them last week, and created the new case study section on the website. So it's if you haven't seen it, check it out.
And as far as like, we talked about advertising a little, but there's also pay per click type of app strategies. Do you know anything to that?
I don't know a lot about that, to be honest.
Okay.
The key is that when you're dealing with, number one, AMP supports a lot of current ad party providers. So if you look in the repo, you're going to see a lot of ad providers that you can use off the shelf with your existing sort of ad networks. In terms of the way that you deal with things like pay-per-click or your view stage or things like that, there's a lot of APIs within AMP that already sort of do this. Things like Intersection Observer and things of that nature, to actually figure out exactly where you sort of exist in time. Because you got to keep in mind, AMP will prioritize, like to Paul's point, AMP will prioritize. So if your ad is doing things that it should not, it might get to just knocked out. It might go display none and you will not show. So when you're building these sorts of things, there is a set of guidelines that, as long as you adhere to and you sort of listen to these sort of events to make sure that you're actually rendered on screen, you can still do the same sort of thing that from an advertising standpoint that you may want. Because there is obviously, AMP doesn't try to say you can't make revenue from your content. It's not trying to say that at all. You just have to understand how it's not necessarily the same sort of thing that you're going to do in a normal sort of web app or web page. Critical rendering path is key. How you process data on the thread or main thread is key. How you handle requests is sort of also in there. How you serve them from the origin. There's lots of different sort of pieces to that puzzle. So I highly recommend you read the README in the AMP HTML repo that's under ads and AMP-ads, I think.
Yeah, and it also feels like there's some general learning there for everybody, just like regarding web and performance, boosting, just understand what that means.
And that's actually precisely the reason why, this was actually a very good summary, and I learned something here as well. But that just reminds me that you should probably check out if you're in the ad, if you're building on ad technology, a lot of things that we heard was, well, now that AMP is loading so fast, my apps look really crappy because they're loading slow. What can I do against that? And that's a real problem, right? Because you want the ads, to be loading as quickly as the page does, essentially. And to do that, we created AMP for Ads, which is basically using AMP to build your ads themselves, to allow them to compete with the main content in some way, and just get it on at the same time. And so everyone wins, really, right? Because your mobile phone battery wins because there's much less to do. Your monetization wins because the ad loads much quicker. And so we all win, really. And that's why I think it's a very good idea. And the same goes for AMP for landing pages, which is the next step, where if you click that AMP ad, it goes to a landing page that is AMP as well. And that landing page has already been preloaded as part of the ad because it's using AMP, right? So remember, it can preload just the first viewport very easily, which means that the next click will be extremely quick. And again, probably help with monetization. So our hope is to just raise the whole ecosystem at once through the AMP ecosystem.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right.
Way to do those flash splash pages,
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I don't miss them.
No, I don't. It seems better.
So Paul, this was amazing. Thank you so much for your time today. And I guess as we're wrapping up with the last question or / questions, what are some words of wisdom for developers that, just some last parting words of wisdom from you for developers starting their AMP journey? And then maybe as well as what are some upcoming events and conferences that people can attend where they can learn about these things?
Sure. First of all, you're very welcome. It was great to be here and discuss AMP. And then, in terms of what are the words I can give? Well, one, don't be afraid of using AMP in ways that we haven't envisioned, and especially don't think that the mobile accelerated mobile pages forces you to create a pure mobile-only design. AMP is just a superset of HTML and allows you to do responsive design just as easily. You can create your whole page in AMP if you want to, if that works for you. The AMP project.org site is all AMP, for instance, as well as a lot of my blog. And so just don't let yourself be limited by the idea of I need to build this for mobile and it's only going to be seen by mobile users. Try to create a strategy and not just create AMP pages because you think you need to have them in addition to all the other ecosystems, but try to create a strategy for the user. Think about the user journey. How does your user get to content most quickly, and how can you upgrade them then on the user journey to engage more with your app or site or product? Don't think about the technology as first. Think about what you want to do, and then think about what technology is most beneficial on your journey. And then in terms of events, I think what you might want to do is definitely tune into the Chrome Dev Summit in November. I think it's the 10th and the 11th, if I'm correct, of November. So the show is booked out as far as I know, but We have a live stream. It's free. Just go check it out. And we'll have a lot of good talks about progressive web apps, but also I'm going to do one of us is going to do probably an AMP talk. So please stay tuned, and we'll make sure we cover all those topics.
Well, thanks again for coming on. If people want to find you or ask you questions about AMP or contribute to the project, how do they do that?
Well, go to ampproject.org. We have a new support section right in the navigation that gives you follow-ups for all those things. Now, the GitHub project is probably the best place to collaborate. I specifically work a lot on the AMP HTML/docs, which is the website itself on GitHub. And we accept also the pull requests. Feel free to comment us with any questions, with any issues you have. Then we also have the AMP mailing list to help you with any implementation issues. Again, linked from the website in the support section. And of course, you can reach out to me individually on Twitter if you want to, at PBAKAUS, or via email as well. Same thing at google.com. Yeah, that's really it.
And what's your Twitter handle?
PBAKAUS.
Sweet. This has been episode number 110 of the Web Platform Podcast, AMP, the AMP Mobile Revolution. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Paul.